Everyone laughed at the black lady in the restaurant, until the mob boss stood up and said this. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The restaurant was buzzing with chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the sound of laughter echoing through the lavish dining hall. The golden chandeliers above reflected the gleam of polished silverware, and the air was filled with the aroma of expensive wine and gourmet dishes. At a corner table, a group of guests laughed uproariously, their voices growing louder and more condescending. Their eyes fell on the black woman who was quietly carrying plates to their table. Her name was Clara, a waitress who had worked at this upscale restaurant for months, doing her best to blend into the background. Clara knew her place. She had been taught that from an early age. She was the one who served, never the one who sat at the table. The laughter began as a quiet murmur, but it didn't take long before it grew more vicious. Is that how they train you people to serve? You'd think they'd at least teach you how to walk without tripping over your own feet. One of the guests sneered, looking her up and down with disdain. Another guest, a woman dressed in expensive designer clothes, snickered. I bet she's just happy to be here. They probably don't get many opportunities to be in places like this. Let's see if she can handle a real meal, she mocked. Clara's face flushed. She had heard it all before, comments about her race, her job, her place in the world. But this was different. This time, they were doing it openly, in front of everyone, as though she were invisible. Clara clenched her jaw and kept her head down. She wasn't going to let them see her break. She continued to serve their food, though the weight of their words pressed down on her like a heavy stone. She felt every insult like a slap across her face. But she held herself together. Just do your job, she thought. Just get through this. But as she set a glass of wine on the table, the laughter grew louder. One man reached out and, with a cruel grin, knocked the glass over, spilling the red liquid all over her uniform. Oops. Looks like you're a little clumsy after all. Maybe they should fire you and hire someone who can at least keep things clean, he said with a smirk. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding. She could feel the heat of the room, the stares of the other guests, the weight of their laughter suffocating her. This time, it was too much. Clara could feel her hands shaking as she tried to wipe the wine from her blouse. The humiliation was unbearable, and all she wanted to do was run away, to escape the scorn and mockery. But she couldn't. She was trapped in this moment. That's when the door to the restaurant opened, and in walked a man whose presence seemed to stop the room in its tracks. Dressed in a sharp black suit, his dark eyes scanned the room with a look that made the other patrons shift uncomfortably. His name was Don Vito, and he wasn't just any man. He was the head of the most powerful crime family in the city, feared and respected by everyone in the room, and by everyone in the city for that matter. As he walked past the tables, his eyes briefly met Clara's. For a second, time seemed to slow. Clara didn't know what it was about this man, but something in his gaze made her feel seen. And for the first time that evening, she didn't feel invisible. Don Vito approached the table where the laughter had been coming from. Without saying a word, he pulled out a chair and sat down. The room grew quiet, and the energy shifted. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew the kind of power he wielded. The guests at the table fell silent, suddenly unsure of how to act. The man who had spilled the wine was now looking nervously at Don Vito, his smile fading. Don Vito didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him at all. Instead, he looked at Clara. He raised an eyebrow, then slowly turned to the group of guests. You think it's funny to make someone feel small? He asked, his voice calm, but with a dangerous edge. The laughter died instantly. The man who had mocked Clara earlier tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. You think you can just laugh at someone, humiliate them for your own amusement, and there will be no consequences? Don Vito continued, his voice growing colder. Clara's heart raced, but this time it wasn't out of fear. She felt something she hadn't felt all night. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The man who had insulted her shrank in his seat, unable to look Don Vito in the eye. The rest of the guests looked on, unsure of what would happen next. Don Vito stood up, turning to Clara, and with a voice that only she could hear, he said, Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. You have more dignity in your little finger than these people have in their entire bodies. Clara's eyes widened, and for the first time that evening, she allowed herself to smile. It was small, but it was enough. The room remained silent as Don Vito walked out, leaving the guests in stunned silence, and Clara standing taller than she had all night. The silence in the restaurant hung heavily in the air, the atmosphere thick with tension as everyone sat frozen in place. Clara stood by the table, her heart still racing, as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. Don Vito, the powerful mafia boss, had not only stood up for her, but had utterly turned the room's energy on its head. His words lingered in the air, his presence alone intimidating everyone in the room. But as he walked out, the energy began to shift, slowly returning to normal, as if the chaos had never happened. Clara took a deep breath and began to gather herself. She knew the moment Don Vito spoke to her, she would never forget it. It was the first time someone had looked at her and made her feel valued, truly valued, as a person, not just as a servant. For the first time that night, Clara smiled, a soft smile that grew slowly but surely as the weight lifted off her shoulders. She had been humiliated in front of so many people, but now she felt a shift within herself. She no longer felt small. She felt like she could stand tall, if only for a moment. Her shift was nearly over, and as she cleaned up the table where the group had sat, she noticed the eyes of the remaining guests on her. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. They were watching her, noticing her, and that gave her a sense of power she never thought she'd have in this place. When she walked back to the kitchen, Marco, the head waiter, caught her attention. He was standing near the kitchen door, watching her with a look of disbelief. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "You okay?" Clara paused for a second, then nodded, forcing a confident smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." But Marco wasn't convinced. He had seen the way Don Vito had spoken to her, the way the entire room had turned to silence. He had seen her take control of the moment without saying a word. He was curious, but he didn't push. "You know," Marco continued, "not many people can get that kind of attention from Don Vito. He doesn't usually bother with anyone in this place." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. She had never thought of herself as someone important, not in a place like this. To hear that Don Vito had even acknowledged her made her wonder what had changed. She had spent so many years hiding behind the walls of this restaurant, working tirelessly, just trying to survive and pay the bills. But now, for the first time, she felt like her life had the potential to be something more. After a moment, she responded softly, "I don't know why he did that, Marco. But I'm glad he did." Marco gave her a knowing smile, one of respect. "You've got something. I don't know what it is, but he saw it. Maybe it's time you started seeing it, too." Clara looked away, her thoughts racing. She hadn't even realized that for so long, she had never allowed herself to believe in her own worth. She had always been the one to serve, to clean, to fade into the background. She was always the one who was overlooked, dismissed. But Don Vito's words had unlocked something inside her, something that had been buried for years. As the night wore on, Clara finished her shift, still deep in thought. The restaurant emptied out, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She grabbed her coat and walked out the back door into the cool night air. The city seemed quieter now, the bustling streets no longer filled with the same overwhelming noise. It was as if the world had shifted for her. As she walked through the dimly lit alley towards the subway, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously. The message simply read, "Meet me tomorrow, same time. Don Vito." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the message, her mind spinning. What did he want with her? Was this a mistake? She shook her head, trying to clear the doubts. Maybe this was her chance. Maybe this was the moment she had been waiting for. For the first time, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. She quickly typed a response. "I'll be there." The next day, Clara arrived at the address Don Vito had sent her. It was an office building in the heart of the city, tall and imposing. She felt a mix of anxiety and excitement as she walked in, the doors sliding open automatically. The receptionist directed her to a private elevator that took her to the top floor. When the doors opened, Clara found herself in a large, modern office with a breathtaking view of the city. Don Vito was standing by the window, looking out over the skyline. As she stepped inside, he turned to face her. His dark eyes seemed to soften when they met hers. "Clara," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. I asked you here because I see something in you. You have potential, and I want to offer you an opportunity. Clara's heart raced. She wasn't sure what to expect, but the look in his eyes told her this was no ordinary offer. She stood still, waiting for him to continue. You've been working here for a long time, Don Vito said. But I think you're capable of much more than serving tables. You could be part of something bigger, something important. Clara couldn't believe what she was hearing. Part of something bigger? She had always dreamed of something more, but never imagined this kind of offer. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Don Vito smiled, a faint, knowing smile. I can give you the chance to leave this place behind. You can have a role in my organization, if you're willing to take the risk. Clara stood frozen. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had dreamed of for so long. But could she take the leap? Could she leave everything she had known and step into the unknown? As she looked at Don Vito, she realized something. This was her chance to truly live, to stop hiding and start fighting for her future. I'll do it, she said finally, her voice steady with newfound confidence. Don Vito nodded, his expression approving. Good. You've made the right choice, Clara. For the first time in her life, Clara felt like she was in control of her own destiny. Clara's heart was still racing as she sat in the sleek office, Don Vito's words echoing in her mind. She had made the decision to take the leap, to step into a world she had never imagined. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with fear. This was it. She was about to leave behind everything she knew, the restaurant, the life of servitude, and embrace something entirely new. But as the minutes passed, doubts crept into her mind. Was she ready for this? Could she really live up to the expectations that Don Vito had set? She looked around the room, taking in the modern decor, the impressive view of the city, but it all felt distant now. Her thoughts kept circling back to the moment when she had stood up to the laughter, when Don Vito had stepped in and turned everything around. That moment had changed her life, but the reality of what she was about to do was sinking in. Don Vito broke the silence, his voice calm and authoritative. Clara, there's no going back once you make this decision. You'll be part of something much larger than yourself. But it's not a life for everyone. There will be risks, challenges, and sacrifices. Are you prepared for that? His words cut through her thoughts, grounding her in the present. Clara swallowed, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I want more than this life. I want to do something that matters. Don Vito's gaze softened for a brief moment, but his tone remained firm. Good. Because once you're in, there's no turning back. We're not just talking about serving at a table anymore. You'll be involved in decisions that will shape lives. You'll have power, but with that comes responsibility. You'll be expected to make tough choices. Clara nodded. She understood. For so long, she had been invisible, a shadow in the background. But this was her chance to step into the light, to prove to herself that she was capable of so much more. Don Vito leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her. There's one thing I need you to understand before we move forward. Trust is everything in this world. If you earn my trust, you'll have access to everything. But if you betray that trust, there will be consequences. I'm not asking you to be a different person, Clara, just to use the skills you already have. Your ability to read people, your intuition, those are more valuable than you think. Clara's mind raced. She had always known that her instincts, her ability to sense the mood of a room, were her strengths. But now, she had to use them in ways she never had before. Don Vito stood up, walking over to a small table in the corner of the room, where a briefcase lay. He opened it, revealing several documents. These are the details of your new position, he said, placing the papers on the table in front of her. You'll start working directly with my associates. It won't be easy, but if you succeed, the rewards will be worth it. More money, more influence. But most importantly, respect. Something you've never had before. Clara hesitated for a moment, then reached forward, signing the documents without a second thought. As she did, she couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. You're officially part of my team now, Don Vito said, his voice approving. Get ready, Clara. Your life is about to change forever. As Clara left the office, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She stepped into the elevator, her reflection in the mirrored walls staring back at her. She barely recognized the woman in the reflection. She seemed so different from the girl who had walked in earlier. The doors opened, and she stepped into the bustling streets of the city. The world seemed the same, yet everything felt different. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was someone to be reckoned with. As the days passed, Clara's life became a whirlwind. Her role in Don Vito's world wasn't what she had expected. She wasn't doing anything glamorous or exciting, not at first. Instead, she spent her time observing, learning, and proving herself. She began to understand the intricate web of power and influence that Don Vito had built. She worked closely with his associates, attending meetings, handling logistics, and making decisions that impacted the operations of the entire organization. Clara quickly realized that this world was nothing like the one she had left behind. There were no easy answers, no simple solutions. Every move she made had consequences. Every decision was weighed against the risk. But with each passing day, Clara grew more confident. She began to trust her instincts more, making connections, learning to navigate the complex relationships within the organization. And as she did, she started to feel a sense of power that she had never known before. She wasn't just following orders anymore. She was helping shape the future. But with the power came the danger. Clara found herself in situations that tested her resolve, where she had to make choices that would have long-lasting effects. She learned quickly that in this world, loyalty was everything, and betrayal was unforgivable. She had earned Don Vito's trust, but she knew that one mistake could cost her everything. One evening, as Clara was leaving the office late, she received a phone call. It was Don Vito. "Clara," he said, his voice serious. "There's something I need you to do. It's a delicate situation, but I trust you. Handle it, and you'll prove your loyalty. Fail, and it could cost you everything." Clara's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She knew this was the test, the one that would define her future in this world. "I'll do it," she said, her voice unwavering. "I won't let you down." She hung up the phone and took a deep breath. She was ready for whatever came next. She had come too far to back down now. Clara stood in front of the sleek, glass building that housed Don Vito's operations. It was late, and the city lights glistened in the distance, reflecting off the high-rise windows. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the hem of her coat, trying to steady herself. She had come a long way from the woman who was humiliated in the restaurant that night, but now the stakes were higher. Don Vito had given her a test, one that could either cement her place in his world or unravel everything she had worked for. She wasn't sure what he wanted her to do, but his trust in her had been clear. She had to prove herself. Clara walked through the front doors, past the security checkpoint, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, she felt the weight of the silence. The building seemed to pulse with quiet intensity, and Clara wondered if she was ready for what lay ahead. When the elevator dinged, Clara stepped out into a hallway lined with dark wood and modern art on the walls. She had seen it all before: luxury, power, exclusivity, but it felt different now. She wasn't just an observer. She was part of this world now. She followed the hallway to the large conference room, her mind racing. When she entered, Don Vito was already sitting at the long table, a thick folder in front of him. His expression was serious, his sharp gaze never leaving her as she walked in. "Clara," he said, his voice as calm and measured as ever. "Sit down. We need to talk about the task I've given you." Clara took a seat across from him, her eyes locked on his. She had learned not to show fear, even when she felt it bubbling inside. Don Vito's power was palpable, but she knew she had to stand her ground. "What's the task?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nervous tension building up in her chest. Don Vito slid the folder across the table toward her. "This is about someone close to me. Someone who's become a liability," he explained. "I need you to handle it the right way." Clara opened the folder carefully, scanning the documents inside. There were photos, names, and dates, information about a person she had never heard of before. As she went through the details, she realized the situation was more complicated than she had imagined. This wasn't just about business, it was personal. The person in question had betrayed Don Vito, and now it was Clara's job to take care of the situation. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Clara asked, her voice quieter now. Don Vito leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the surface of the table. "I want you to take them out of the picture. Permanently," he said, his words cold and deliberate. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had known this was a dangerous world, but hearing the words come from Don Vito himself made it all too real. She took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "Are you sure this is the right move?" she asked cautiously. Don Vito's gaze hardened. "I don't ask for your opinion, Clara. I asked if you're ready." Clara stared at the folder, her mind racing. She had been thrown into a world where life and death were decisions made in the blink of an eye. She could feel the weight of the situation, the responsibility that Don Vito had placed in her hands. This wasn't just about following orders anymore. This was her chance to prove she was more than just a servant, more than someone who took orders without question. She had to make a choice. Either she became part of the power, or she was swallowed by it. Her hand hovered over the folder, the decision looming in front of her. Clara had always wanted more than the life she had known. She had always dreamed of something bigger, something that gave her a sense of purpose, of respect. Now, she had to decide if she was willing to embrace that power at all costs. "I'm ready," Clara said finally, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I'll take care of it." Don Vito gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. "Good. You'll leave in the morning. I'll arrange everything." Clara stood, feeling the gravity of the situation sink in. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. As she left the room, she felt the weight of Don Vito's words pressing down on her. She had just taken the first step into a world where there were no second chances. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a woman trying to survive. She was becoming part of something much bigger, and there was no going back. The next morning, Clara was waiting at the meeting point Don Vito had arranged. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and she stepped inside. The driver didn't say a word as they drove through the city, heading toward an unfamiliar part of town. Clara's mind raced with thoughts of the task ahead. She had been trained to remain calm in the face of pressure, but this was different. This was real. She was going to have to make a choice that could change everything. The car stopped in front of a small building, and Clara stepped out, her heart pounding. She knew what she had to do. She walked into the building, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The person she was supposed to meet was waiting for her inside, and Clara could feel the tension building in the air. She had come this far, and now it was time to see if she could handle the world she had chosen. The world where power, loyalty, and betrayal were the rules of the game. Clara stood in the hallway, her heart pounding as she glanced down at the folder in her hands. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. She had crossed the threshold into Don Vito's world, and now there was no turning back. The mission he had given her was simple, yet filled with consequences. The man she was sent to meet, the one who had become a liability, had to be dealt with. But Clara wasn't naive. She understood the gravity of the task at hand. She wasn't just taking out a person. She was becoming part of a much larger machine, one that could break her just as easily as it had lifted her. The building she stood in was unassuming, but it housed some of the most dangerous people in the city. Clara could feel it in the air, the tension, the weight of secrecy, the sense that every step she took was being watched. She took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and stepped into the room. The man she was supposed to meet was seated at a small table in the middle of the room. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if sizing her up. He was an older man, his face weathered by years of hard living, but there was something sharp about him. Clara knew from Don Vito's files that this man had once been loyal, but now, he was a risk. His name was Anthony. He had crossed Don Vito one too many times, and now it was her job to make sure he wouldn't cause any more trouble. She walked toward the table, every muscle in her body tense. As she took a seat across from him, she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. She wasn't sure if he knew what was coming, but she could tell he had an instinct for survival. "Clara, right?" he asked, his voice gravelly, with a hint of suspicion. Clara nodded, meeting his gaze. "Yes, Don Vito sent me." Anthony's eyes flickered at the mention of Don Vito's name, but he quickly masked his reaction. "I'm sure he did," he said, his tone flat. "What does he want with me?" Clara didn't hesitate. She had to stay focused. "You've been making moves that aren't in line with Don Vito's interests. He gave you a chance to straighten things out, but you've refused. Now he's asking for a resolution." Anthony leaned back in his chair, a cynical smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "And you think you can handle it? A girl like you, sent to do a man's job?" Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't let his words rattle her. "I'm here because Don Vito trusts me," she said evenly. "And I'm here to make sure this situation doesn't escalate." Anthony's smile faded, replaced by a more guarded expression. "So what now? You're just going to take me out? Just like that?" Clara's gaze hardened. "That's up to you. You have a choice. Walk away, disappear, and Don Vito will let you live. But if you resist—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Anthony was a smart man, and he knew exactly what she meant. There was no room for error in this world. Anthony's eyes darkened as he studied her, trying to gauge if she was bluffing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, as the weight of the decision loomed. Finally, Anthony broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you're different, don't you?" he said, his gaze flicking to the folder in her hands. "You think you're some kind of angel sent to save me? Well, let me tell you something. There's no saving anyone in this game. It's all about survival. You think Don Vito cares about you? You think he sees you as anything more than a tool to use?" Clara's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had always known this world was cold, but hearing it so bluntly felt different. It stung, and for a moment, she wondered if she was just another pawn in Don Vito's game. But she quickly shook off the doubt. She wasn't here to save anyone, and she wasn't about to let herself be fooled. "I'm not here to be saved, Anthony," she said, her voice firm. "I'm here to make sure things are taken care of. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." Anthony stared at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Clara instinctively reached for the gun at her side, her heart racing, but Anthony didn't make a move toward her. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "You're right about one thing," he said after a pause. "This is all about survival. But you've got it wrong if you think Don Vito cares about you. He'll use you until you're no longer useful. That's how it works. That's how it always works." Clara remained silent, but her mind was racing. She could feel the truth in his words, even if she didn't want to admit it. She had already given up so much for this life, and the price was only going to get higher. But she had made her choice. She wasn't turning back now. "I'm done talking," Clara said, standing up. "You're either with us, or you're not. Make your choice." Anthony turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. He could see the resolve in her expression, the determination in her stance. And for a brief moment, he seemed to reconsider. Then, slowly he nodded. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "But remember, Clara, this world doesn't care about you. And sooner or later, it'll break you." Clara didn't respond. She simply nodded, turned on her heel, and walked toward the door. She had no time for doubts now. She had a job to do, and she was going to finish it. As she stepped out of the building and into the cold night air, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. But one thing was certain: she was no longer the woman she used to be. Clara stood in the shadows of the alleyway, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had just left the building where she had confronted Anthony, and now she was ready to face the consequences of her actions. It had been a few hours since their conversation, and though it seemed like a simple decision, handle the situation, take out the liability, the weight of the task still lingered in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't the first time she had faced a difficult choice, but this was different. This time, she had chosen a side. The world of Don Vito wasn't one where second chances existed. If she failed, it would be over. Clara's phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out quickly, knowing it could only be one person. The screen lit up with Don Vito's name. "Clara," his voice came through the line, calm but commanding as always. "It's done." Clara's grip tightened around the phone. She was standing at the edge of the unknown, yet she felt an unwavering confidence as she spoke. "Yes, it's done," she replied, her voice steady. "I took care of it." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and Clara's mind raced. What was Don Vito thinking? Was he going to congratulate her or question her decision? "Good," Don Vito's voice returned, his tone now softening just slightly. "You've done well. But remember, the job isn't over until you prove yourself. This was only the beginning, Clara. You'll have more to prove." Clara swallowed hard, but she didn't falter. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said firmly. Don Vito chuckled lightly, and for a brief moment, Clara felt the tension between them ease. "I know you are. Meet me tomorrow at the usual place." There's more work to be done. As he hung up, Clara stood there for a moment longer, the weight of his words settling into her mind. She had proven herself, but she knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. The world she had chosen to be a part of would never let her go. It would only demand more. And as she walked away from the alley, her mind turned to the future. What kind of person was she becoming? Was she still Clara, the woman who served tables in that restaurant? Or had she become someone else entirely, a figure in a much larger game? A game where the rules were made by the powerful, not by those like her? She shook off the thoughts as she stepped into the night, the city streets bustling with life around her. She had a meeting tomorrow, a chance to take her place in Don Vito's empire. She couldn't afford to question herself now, not when everything she wanted was within her reach. The next day, Clara stood outside the building, her nerves slowly dissipating as the familiar tension of the job settled in. This time, there would be no turning back. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was someone who had earned Don Vito's trust, and that meant something in this world. She was ready to take the next step. As she entered the building and walked into the office, Don Vito was waiting for her. His posture was relaxed, his eyes focused on something in front of him. But when Clara entered, he looked up. "You did well yesterday," he said, his voice devoid of warmth but filled with approval. Clara nodded, taking a seat across from him. "Thank you." Don Vito studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her worth. Finally, he spoke. "You've earned a place with me, Clara. But as I told you before, this world doesn't come without its costs." He paused, his gaze piercing. "You have to be willing to do what's necessary, no matter the consequences. No hesitation. That's how you survive." Clara felt the weight of his words, but she wasn't afraid. She had already chosen. "I understand," she replied. Don Vito leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "There's something else I need you to handle. Something more delicate than yesterday's situation. It involves someone close to me, and I need your discretion." Clara straightened in her chair, ready for the challenge. "Who?" she asked. Don Vito didn't immediately answer. Instead, he handed her a file, much like the one she had received the day before. "This is Maria," he said, his voice taking on a colder edge. "She's been with me for years. But recently, she's been making mistakes. I can't have that. I need her removed from the picture, quietly, without drawing attention." Clara opened the file, scanning the contents. Quickly, Maria's face stared back at her, a woman who had been trusted in Don Vito's inner circle. The weight of the task hit Clara harder this time. This wasn't just another liability. It was someone who had served Don Vito, someone who had earned his trust. Taking her out would be a whole different thing. But Clara didn't hesitate. She knew the rules. "I'll handle it," she said quietly. Don Vito nodded, his face unreadable. "I know you will. You'll meet with Maria tomorrow. Do what needs to be done. I'll be watching." Clara left the office, the file still in her hand. This was different. Maria wasn't just a stranger to Don Vito. She was someone who had been loyal, someone who had once been on the same level as Clara. The thought of betraying her made Clara feel a pang in her chest, but she pushed it away. There was no room for doubt in this world. If she hesitated now, everything she had worked for would be lost. She had to do this. As Clara made her way to the meeting spot, she found herself questioning her choices for the first time. Was this who she had become? Was she willing to sacrifice everything? Her humanity, her morals, for power? But as the shadows grew longer and the reality of what she had to do loomed closer, she knew there was no turning back now. She had already stepped into the darkness, and now, it was time to fully embrace it. Clara arrived at the rundown apartment building just as the sun was setting. The shadows cast by the tall, grimy structure made the entire area feel colder, darker. She could feel the weight of the file in her hand, the assignment she had been given hanging over her like a storm cloud. This wasn't just another job. Maria had been loyal, just like Clara had been. And now Clara was being asked to betray that loyalty, to execute the one thing she'd been trained to do in this dangerous world. As she walked up the narrow, dimly lit hallway toward Maria's apartment, her mind raced. She had come this far, had proven herself to Don Vito, but the task before her felt different. Maria wasn't a liability like the others. She was someone who had earned trust, someone who had been in the inner circle. Clara paused outside the door, taking a deep breath. She wasn't sure if this was going to be the hardest thing she had ever done or the easiest. There was no hesitation in Don Vito's voice. And that was all Clara needed to know. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. Clara knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. A few moments passed before Maria's voice came from inside. Clara? Is everything okay? Clara's heart skipped a beat. Maria knew her name, had worked with her before. She wasn't a stranger. But Clara couldn't let herself falter now. She couldn't afford to show weakness. It's me, Maria. Can we talk? Clara called through the door, keeping her voice steady. There was a pause, followed by the sound of the lock turning. The door creaked open, and Maria appeared, her face lighting up when she saw Clara standing there. Clara, I wasn't expecting you. Come in, come in. Clara hesitated, then stepped inside. The apartment was small, neat, with soft lighting and a small kitchen table. Maria smiled warmly, offering Clara a seat. I'm just making some tea. Want some? Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure she could stomach anything right now. Her mind was too focused on the task at hand. As Maria busied herself in the kitchen, Clara looked around the room, noticing the small things, family photos on the wall, a few framed mementos of a life lived outside the criminal world. For a moment, Clara wondered how things had gone wrong for Maria. She had been loyal. She had been good at her job. But loyalty was only as good as the moment you stopped being useful. Clara's eyes narrowed, her mind focusing again. This wasn't about Maria anymore. This was about survival. Don Vito didn't have time for mistakes. He didn't have time for sentimentality. And if Clara was going to stay in his world, she needed to do this. Maria set the cup of tea down in front of Clara, her eyes kind. What brings you here tonight? She asked, settling down in the chair across from her. Clara took a deep breath. She had to get through this, had to stay calm. Don Vito wants us to talk, she said softly, keeping her tone neutral. Maria's expression shifted, just a flicker of something passing through her eyes. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same calm, collected exterior that had always marked her. I'm listening, Maria said, her voice steady. Clara stared at her for a long moment. The weight of the situation seemed to grow with every passing second. She had been trained to be ruthless, but this wasn't a stranger she was dealing with. This was someone who had stood by Don Vito's side for years. Someone who had once been trusted. Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Maria, she said, her voice firm but controlled. Don Vito said that you've made some mistakes. He can't afford to keep you around anymore. Maria's expression didn't change, but Clara saw the subtle shift in her eyes. There was a moment of silence before Maria spoke, her voice quiet. I see. So it's over then? Clara nodded slowly. You're a liability, Maria. Don Vito doesn't tolerate mistakes. He wants this dealt with. Maria stared at her for a moment, her hands resting on the table in front of her. I see, she said again, her voice distant now, as if she were already accepting the inevitable. Clara felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want this, but she had no choice. I'm sorry, Clara said, though the words felt hollow. You were loyal, but it's too late for that now. The silence between them stretched, heavy and thick. Then Maria stood up, walking over to the window and looking out at the city below. Clara remained seated, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She couldn't bring herself to look away. She had to do this. She had to finish what she had started. Maria turned back to her after a moment, her face calm, almost resigned. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice soft. You don't have to be like them. Clara stood up, her gaze hardening. I don't have a choice. Maria's eyes softened. Yes, you do. You always have a choice. Clara shook her head, trying to keep her composure. Not anymore, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I've already chosen. Maria looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. I understand, she said quietly. But don't forget, Clara, there's always a price to pay. Clara didn't respond. She couldn't. She had made her decision, and she knew what she had to do. Goodbye, Maria, she whispered before she moved toward the door. As Clara stepped back into the hallway, she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She had done what she was supposed to do. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Clara walked out of Maria's apartment building, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. She had done what needed to be done, what Don Vito had asked of her. And yet, as she made her way down the dimly lit street, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep within her. She had taken a life, a decision she had never imagined herself making. But here she was, a part of a world she barely understood, one where trust was a currency and loyalty could be bought and sold. She had joined this world, or rather, it had swallowed her whole. The cold night air did little to calm the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. She had been trained to be ruthless, to follow orders without question. But for the first time, Clara questioned everything. Was it worth it? The money, the power, the respect. Was it all worth sacrificing her soul? She shook her head as if to rid herself of the thoughts. There was no time for doubts now. She had a job to do, and she couldn't afford to be distracted. As she walked towards the subway, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Don Vito. Meet me at the usual spot. We need to discuss your next move. Clara's stomach tightened. She had been expecting this, but now that the moment had come, she wasn't sure what to think. She was still processing what had just happened, still trying to make sense of it all. But there was no time to think. She needed to move. She quickly typed a response, agreeing to meet him. As she made her way to the designated location, Clara's mind wandered back to the decision she had made. Maria was no longer a part of the organization, and Don Vito was pleased with her. But that didn't make it any easier. The world she was now a part of wasn't like the one she had left behind. It was dark, dangerous, and filled with shadows, and Clara was learning quickly that in this world, there were no friends, only allies. When she arrived at the meeting place, a small, nondescript bar tucked away on a side street, she could already see Don Vito's black car parked nearby. The driver nodded as she approached, but Clara didn't engage. She had learned not to speak unless necessary. The door to the bar opened with a creak, and Clara stepped inside. The low hum of conversation and clinking of glasses filled the air, but there was something different about this place. It was a place where business was done, where deals were made in the shadows. She made her way to the back room, where Don Vito was waiting for her. He was seated at a table, a glass of whiskey in his hand, but his eyes never left her as she entered. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth as always, but there was an edge to it tonight. "You've proven yourself. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about following orders. This is about power, loyalty, and survival. And right now, I need you to choose which side you're on." Clara paused, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady. Don Vito's gaze hardened. "You've done well, but things are shifting. There are people in this organization who think you're too inexperienced, too new to be trusted with the kind of power I've given you. They think you're a liability." Clara's heart raced. She had worked hard to earn Don Vito's trust, but now it felt like it was all slipping away. "Who?" she asked, her voice tight. Don Vito smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "People you'll meet soon enough. They're watching you, Clara. They're waiting for you to slip up. But I'm not. I've been watching you, and I know what you're capable of." He stood up and walked over to her, his presence looming. "But I can't protect you forever. There will come a time when you'll have to make a choice, and it'll define your future. Will you stand with me? Or will you let them destroy everything you've worked for?" Clara felt the pressure of his words weigh down on her. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when she would have to prove her loyalty beyond a shadow of a doubt. There could be no room for doubt now. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I've made my choice." Don Vito looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to gauge her sincerity. Then, slowly he nodded. "Good. That's what I wanted to hear." He paused before continuing, his eyes narrowing. "There's one more thing. There's a situation that needs to be handled, and I want you to take care of it. It's time for you to prove that you belong here." Clara's stomach twisted. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Don Vito's eyes gleamed with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "I want you to take out a rival. Someone who's been encroaching on my territory. This will be your test. Prove that you're more than just a pawn in this game." Clara took a deep breath. She knew what this meant. The decision was final now. There was no going back. If she wanted to stay in Don Vito's world, she had to follow through. "Consider it done," she said, her voice firm. Don Vito smiled again, but this time, there was something darker in his expression. "I knew you were the right choice. Now go. Show them what you're capable of." Clara left the bar, the weight of her next task settling into her bones. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she would prove herself. The world she had entered was harsh, unforgiving, but it was the only world she knew now. And as she walked into the cold night air, She knew one thing for certain. She would never go back to the life she had left behind. Clara stood in the parking lot, the cold wind whipping through her hair as she stared at the black car parked in front of her. Her heart was pounding in her chest, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Don Vito's words echoed in her mind. This will be your test. She had already proven herself once, but this was different. This wasn't just about loyalty anymore. It was about power, survival, and how far she was willing to go. She had already crossed a line she never thought she would, and now she was about to cross another. Clara took a deep breath, pushing the thoughts to the back of her mind. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. She opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she started the engine. The night was quiet, the streets empty as she drove toward her destination. The man she was about to take out had been a thorn in Don Vito's side for months. He had been encroaching on Don Vito's territory, making moves that threatened to destabilize everything. Don Vito had given her the task of eliminating him, and it was a job she couldn't afford to fail. As she drove, Clara's mind raced. This wasn't what she had imagined her life would be like. She had always dreamed of something bigger, but this world, the one she had stepped into, was darker than she could have ever imagined. There was no mercy, no room for hesitation. The world she had chosen demanded results. As the familiar streets of the city passed by, Clara's thoughts turned to Maria. She had been close to her, and the task she had carried out felt like a betrayal. She had always admired Maria's loyalty, her commitment to Don Vito. And yet, there she was, forced to eliminate someone who had once been her ally. It was a reminder of the price of loyalty in this world. Clara shook her head, trying to clear the thoughts. She couldn't afford to think about Maria. Not now. She needed to focus. She reached the location, a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was the perfect place for a quiet job. No one would hear, no one would see. Clara parked the car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, the cold air biting at her skin as she moved quickly, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. She reached the warehouse and paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. The dim light inside flickered as she moved through the rows of crates and boxes, her heart racing. She could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something was about to happen. The man she was here to eliminate was waiting inside, his back turned as he spoke to someone on the phone. Clara moved silently, drawing the gun from her jacket. The moment of truth had arrived. As she stepped closer, she felt a sudden wave of doubt, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for doubt now. She had made her decision. She raised the gun and aimed carefully, her finger hovering over the trigger. Just as she was about to pull it, the man on the phone turned, his eyes locking with hers. For a brief moment, Clara hesitated. His face was familiar. He had been one of Don Vito's allies, someone she had seen at meetings and events. But now he was a threat, and Clara knew what had to be done. She didn't hesitate any longer. She pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot rang out, echoing through the empty warehouse. The man fell to the ground, blood pooling around him as Clara stood over him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. The job was finished. But as she stood there, looking down at the lifeless body before her, a cold emptiness settled inside her. She had crossed another line. She had killed, and there was no going back. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She quickly wiped the gun clean, making sure there was no evidence left behind. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. As she turned to leave, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, her hand instinctively going to the gun again. But it wasn't one of Don Vito's men. It was someone she didn't recognize, a tall figure in a dark coat, his face hidden in the shadows. "Nice work," the man said, his voice low and smooth. Clara tensed, her mind racing. Who was this? How had he found her? "Who are you?" she asked, her voice tight. The man stepped closer, his silhouette slowly becoming clearer in the dim light. "Just someone who appreciates efficiency," he replied, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I saw what you did. Impressive." Clara's heart raced. She didn't trust him. She couldn't afford to trust anyone. "What do you want?" she asked, her hand still on the gun. The man raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, Clara. I'm not here to make trouble. I'm just here to offer you something." Clara narrowed her eyes. "I don't need anything from you." "That's where you're wrong," the man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You don't want to be just a tool in Don Vito's game. You're smart, capable. You can do so much more. You just have to know where to look. Clara's mind raced. Who was this guy? What did he want from her? But she didn't have time for games. She had a job to do, and the last thing she needed was someone distracting her. I don't have time for this, she said, her voice firm. Leave now, or I'll make you leave. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, calculating. You'll see me again, Clara. We always cross paths in this world. With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Clara standing alone in the warehouse, her mind racing. She had done what Don Vito asked. She had proven herself. But now, she wasn't sure what her future held. The world she had entered was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. And the more she moved through it, the more she realized that the choices she made would come with consequences she couldn't predict. Clara stood in the cold, empty street, her mind racing as she watched the mysterious man disappear into the shadows. His words lingered in her ears, each one like a cold warning. You don't want to be just a tool in Don Vito's game. You can do so much more. His cryptic message echoed in her head as she walked toward the car. She had done what Don Vito had asked, but something about the encounter had shaken her. She had made a choice to prove her loyalty, but now, the lines between right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, were becoming more blurred by the day. She slid into the driver's seat, the sound of the door closing sharply behind her. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, but her mind wasn't focused on the road ahead. It was focused on the man she had just met. Who was he? And why did he feel so certain that she could be more than just Don Vito's pawn? Clara didn't have answers, but she knew one thing. She couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just some random figure in the shadows. He had said they would cross paths again, and she couldn't ignore the certainty in his tone. Could she trust him? Should she? She started the car, the engine growling to life. As she drove, the weight of her actions from the past few days pressed on her. Maria was gone, taken out of the picture at Don Vito's request. And now, the rival she had eliminated had given her a reminder of the dark world she had chosen. The problem was that the deeper she went into Don Vito's world, the more she questioned her place in it. Was she truly in control, or was she just another player in someone else's game? Clara knew she had to prove herself, to show that she was loyal to Don Vito. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that the moment she let her guard down, everything would come crashing down. The car pulled into a quiet parking lot, and Clara parked, taking a deep breath. She looked out at the dark city skyline, illuminated by a few scattered lights. It felt like the world was divided into two parts, the one she had known and the one she was now part of. She was still trying to navigate through it, but every step felt like she was sinking deeper into a world that didn't offer a way out. Just as she was about to step out of the car, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Don Vito. Meet me at the warehouse. We have business to discuss. Clara's pulse quickened. She had expected this. Don Vito had been pleased with her work, but she knew that the more she proved herself, the higher the stakes would become. It was time for another test. She had already taken down Maria and eliminated a rival, but Don Vito's world was built on power, and power was never enough. It was about control. The warehouse wasn't far. Clara's thoughts raced as she made her way there. The city streets were deserted, the night growing colder as the wind picked up. As she neared the warehouse, she saw the familiar black cars parked outside, guards standing watch. Don Vito was waiting. Clara stepped inside the building, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She didn't have to look far to find him. He was standing near the far end of the warehouse, talking to one of his men. When he saw her, he gave a small nod, signaling for her to approach. Clara, he said, his voice carrying the same cold authority she had grown used to. You've done well so far, but there's more at stake now. Clara stood tall, meeting his gaze. What's next? She asked. Don Vito's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't break his gaze. There are some people who think you've moved up too quickly. They want to test you. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what that meant. In Don Vito's world, tests weren't just about proving loyalty. They were about survival. Who? She asked, her voice steady despite the surge of anxiety she felt. Don Vito smiled, but it wasn't a smile of approval. People who have been with me longer. People who think you don't belong here. Clara clenched her jaw. She wasn't going to let anyone take her down. What do I have to do? Don Vito's gaze shifted to the man beside him, and the man handed Clara a small envelope. "Take this," Don Vito said. "Deliver it to someone you'll meet tonight. He'll be expecting you." Clara took the envelope, her fingers brushing the paper. "And who is this person?" she asked, but Don Vito didn't answer directly. "Just remember this, Clara," Don Vito said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "In this world, you can't afford to hesitate. You either do what's necessary, or you're finished." Clara's mind raced. She knew she had no choice. She was already too deep into Don Vito's world to back out now. As she left the warehouse, she felt the weight of the envelope in her hand. She wasn't sure what was inside, but she knew it wasn't going to be easy. Whoever this person was, they were part of the game now, and Clara was a player. She had to make it through. She had to prove herself. The night was growing darker as Clara made her way through the streets, her steps quick and purposeful. She wasn't afraid. She had been trained for this. But as she approached the meeting point, a nagging feeling crept up on her. She had already crossed so many lines, and now, it was time for another test. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew one thing. There was no turning back. Not now. Clara stood at the entrance of the alleyway, the weight of the envelope heavy. In her hand, the night felt colder than it had before, the streets quieter, almost eerie. She had been given a task, a delivery that would test not just her loyalty to Don Vito, but her resolve. She wasn't afraid. She had already crossed so many lines in this world, but this felt different. There was something about the way Don Vito had spoken to her this time, the way he had looked at her. The stakes were higher now, and Clara knew it. The world she had entered wasn't forgiving, and every choice she made could either elevate her or destroy her. As she walked deeper into the alley, her footsteps echoing against the concrete walls, she tried to calm her racing thoughts. The man she was about to meet was a key player in Don Vito's world, someone whose loyalty and power were undisputed. He was someone who had been in Don Vito's inner circle for years, and now it was her turn to prove herself to him. The problem was, she didn't know what kind of man he was. Would he see her as just another tool in the game, or would he see her for what she truly was? A woman who had proven herself capable, a woman who had earned Don Vito's trust? Clara didn't have time to wonder. She reached the door at the end of the alley and knocked twice, the sound sharp in the stillness of the night. Moments later, the door creaked open, and a man stood in the doorway, his face partially shadowed. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and eyes that seemed to pierce through her. He was the one she had come to meet, the one who could either make or break her. "Clara," he said, his voice low but carrying a sense of authority. "Don Vito said you'd be here." Clara nodded, stepping inside without saying a word. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. The room was dimly lit, filled with a sense of unease, as though it was a place where secrets were exchanged and lives were changed in the blink of an eye. The man motioned for her to sit, and Clara complied, placing the envelope on the table between them. "What's this?" the man asked, his eyes flicking to the envelope before meeting her gaze. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had been through too much to show hesitation now. "It's from Don Vito. He said you'd be expecting it," she replied, her voice calm but firm. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, Clara thought she saw a flicker of something. Suspicion, maybe. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a calculated coldness. He picked up the envelope and opened it slowly, pulling out the contents inside. He scanned the papers, his expression unreadable, before placing them back on the table. "Don Vito doesn't trust easily," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "But he's put a lot of faith in you. That means something. To him, and to me." Clara held his gaze, refusing to let her nerves show. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm here to prove myself." The man didn't respond immediately, his eyes studying her for a long time. The silence between them felt heavy, like a test, one that Clara knew she had to pass. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his posture still rigid. "Prove yourself," he repeated, his tone almost mocking. "You think just delivering a message is going to prove yourself? This isn't a game, Clara. This is life or death." Clara felt the tension rise again, but she didn't flinch. She had seen men like him before, men who thought they were untouchable. "I know it's not a game," she said, her voice steady, her eyes not leaving his. "But I've already proven myself in ways that matter. And I'll prove it again." The man studied her for another moment, then nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. "All right," he said, his voice softer now. "I'll give you a chance." Clara exhaled, though she didn't let herself relax. She had earned a small victory, but this was far from over. "But remember, Clara," the man continued, his gaze piercing, "the people you trust here, the people you think you've earned loyalty from, they're all watching you. And one slip up, one mistake, and Don Vito will turn on you as quickly as he turned on Maria." Clara's stomach twisted at the mention of Maria's name, but she didn't let it show. Maria had been a part of this world, just like she had. But in this world, nothing was permanent. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice hardening. "I've already made my choice." The man smiled, a slow, almost approving smile. "Good. Then you'll fit in just fine." He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Follow me," he said, leading her down a narrow hallway at the back of the room. Clara followed, her mind already racing with questions. What was he going to have her do next? Was this really the test she had to pass, or was there something more? As they reached the end of the hallway, the man stopped in front of a door. He turned to face Clara. "You'll be tested again, Clara," he said, his voice low, almost a warning. "But don't forget, trust is a fragile thing. Don't lose it." With that, he opened the door, revealing a small office filled with documents and a few monitors. "This is where it begins," he said, before stepping aside to let her in. Clara took a deep breath, stepping into the room. She was in now, fully entrenched in this world. There was no turning back. As the door clicked shut behind her, Clara felt the weight of her decision sink in. She had come too far to back down. She was part of something much bigger than she had ever imagined, and now, it was time to prove she belonged here. Clara stepped into the small office, the door closing softly behind her. The hum of the monitors and the rustle of papers seemed to fill the room, but Clara barely noticed the sounds. Her mind was still focused on the conversation she had just had, the cryptic warning that had followed her through the narrow hall. "Trust is a fragile thing. Don't lose it." The man's words lingered like a shadow, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the world she had entered was far more dangerous than she had anticipated. She had proven herself so far, but now she had to face the truth. This was a world where even the smallest mistake could cost you everything. The man who had spoken to her earlier stood at the desk, his back to her as he sorted through papers. Without turning around, he spoke in his usual calm voice. "Sit," he commanded. Clara obeyed, walking toward the desk and sitting in the chair across from him. She had learned to be patient, to wait for instructions, but she could feel the tension building inside her. There was something in the air tonight, something different. "Don Vito is impressed with your progress," the man continued, his tone neutral, but there was a hint of something darker beneath it. "But you need to understand something, Clara. This world doesn't operate on loyalty alone. There are alliances, and then there are power plays." Clara leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What are you saying?" The man turned around slowly, his gaze locking with hers. "I'm saying you've been handed power, Clara. And power is dangerous. It makes people uncomfortable, especially those who feel threatened by it." Clara felt her heart rate quicken. "Who's threatening me?" she asked, her voice steady, though she was already bracing herself for what he was about to say. The man smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You'll find out soon enough. But I need you to be ready for what comes next." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to settle in the air between them. "You're being tested again, Clara. This time, it's not about loyalty. It's about who you can trust." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Who should I trust?" "You'll have to make that decision on your own," he said, his voice growing more serious. "But remember, loyalty is earned, not given. And power can be taken just as easily as it's given." Clara sat back, her mind racing. She had learned a lot in this world, but the rules kept changing, and each new challenge felt more complicated than the last. The door to the office opened, and another man stepped inside. This one was older, his face lined with experience, his eyes sharp and calculating. He glanced at Clara, his gaze lingering just a moment longer than necessary before he turned his attention to the man at the desk. "She's ready?" the older man asked. The man behind the desk nodded. "Yes, but she needs to prove it." The older man turned to Clara, studying her with a discerning look. "We have a problem," he said, his voice low. "A problem that needs to be dealt with swiftly and quietly. Don Vito trusts you, but trust only goes so far. We need someone who can act decisively, without hesitation." Can you do that, Clara? Clara didn't hesitate. She had made it this far by acting when others hesitated, by making decisions when no one else could. Yes, she said, her voice firm. I can do it. The older man nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. Good. This is the task we've set for you. We need you to eliminate a threat to Don Vito's operation. It's someone who has been making moves against him, someone who thinks they can take his power. They're dangerous, and they need to be removed. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Who is it? The man at the desk slid a folder across to her. Clara opened it carefully, scanning the contents. The name inside sent a shock through her. She had seen this name before, heard it whispered in the corridors of power. The person was a former ally of Don Vito, someone who had once been trusted, but now had become a liability. Take care of this, Clara, the older man said, his voice low but filled with expectation. Don Vito's future depends on it. Clara closed the folder, her mind already working through the details. She knew what had to be done, but the weight of the task felt heavier now. This wasn't just about doing a job. This was about ensuring Don Vito's control over the city, and if she failed, it could all fall apart. The older man stood up, his eyes never leaving her. You'll leave tonight, he said. Don't fail us. Clara stood, her mind focused, her heart steeled. This was her moment. She had to prove herself once again, not just to Don Vito, but to herself. As she walked out of the office and into the night, the city felt different, darker, more dangerous. But Clara didn't fear the darkness anymore. She had chosen this path, and now, it was time to walk it to the end. There would be no more hesitation, no more doubts, only the next step in her journey. And this time, she wouldn't be looking back. Clara's footsteps echoed in the quiet warehouse as she walked toward the man Don Vito had described. The dim lighting cast long shadows, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal. Every part of this world felt colder now, as though the stakes had grown higher with each passing task. The file she held in her hand felt heavier than ever, the weight of the task she was about to carry out pressing down on her chest. This was it. This was the final test. She had eliminated rivals, proved her loyalty time and time again, but this job would define everything. She was no longer just a tool in Don Vito's game. She had earned her place, but now she had to prove that she could handle the consequences of that position. The man in front of her, someone who had been part of Don Vito's inner circle, had turned against him. He was now a threat, someone who could destabilize everything Don Vito had worked for. And Clara had been chosen to take him out. The man was standing by a stack of crates, his silhouette barely visible in the shadows. He turned as she approached, his eyes narrowing as he saw her. For a brief moment, Clara wondered if he recognized her, if he saw her for who she had become, not just a servant but a player in the game. Clara, he said, his voice gruff. You're the one they sent? I thought I might see you here eventually. Clara stood still, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She had seen men like him before, powerful, confident, but now vulnerable. They all had a weakness, and tonight, Clara would be the one to exploit it. Don Vito sent me, she replied, her voice calm, cold even. And you're a problem that needs to be solved. The man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You think you can just walk in here and do this? You think I'm just going to let you walk away after what you're about to do? Clara's grip tightened on the gun hidden in her jacket. The tension in the room was thick, and every muscle in her body was coiled, ready for the moment she had to act. I don't want to do this, Clara said, her voice almost a whisper, though the words felt like a lie. But you left me no choice. The man stared at her, his eyes flicking down to the gun she had pulled from her jacket. For a brief moment, Clara saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, a recognition that the game was over. But then, his expression hardened again. You don't know what you're doing, he spat. You think you're just going to replace me? Don Vito will turn on you the moment you're no longer useful. He'll make you disappear just like the rest of us. Clara shook her head, her resolve firming with every word he spoke. You don't understand, she said quietly, taking a step closer. I'm already past that point. There's no turning back for me. The man moved quickly, his hand darting toward the gun at his side. But Clara was faster. In a swift motion, she raised her own gun and aimed it at him. She had learned long ago that hesitation meant death. The man stopped, his hand hovering just above the holster. You think you can just take me down like this? He growled, his voice low, filled with defiance. Don Vito will never forgive you. You'll be nothing but a pawn in his game, just like me. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. I'm not a pawn, she said, her voice unwavering. I've made my choice. I've chosen this world, and I will do whatever it takes to survive. The silence between them stretched, a heavy tension hanging in the air. Clara's heart was pounding, but she knew what she had to do. She couldn't back down now. She had to finish what she had started. She had already crossed so many lines. One more wouldn't make a difference. The man lunged at her, but Clara was ready. She fired. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the warehouse, the sharp crack of the bullet cutting through the tension in the air. The man fell to the ground with a heavy thud, his body limp as it hit the cold concrete floor. Clara stood over him for a moment, her breath coming in short bursts, the adrenaline still rushing through her veins. It was over. The man who had once been a part of Don Vito's inner circle was no longer a threat. But as she looked down at him, Clara felt an emptiness settle over her. She had done what she had been ordered to do, but at what cost? She had taken a life, and no matter how many times she told herself it was necessary, the reality of it weighed heavily on her. This was the world she had chosen, the world where loyalty and power were the only things that mattered. But now, she wasn't so sure. Clara looked around the warehouse, the dim light flickering above her. She had earned her place in Don Vito's world, but at what cost? She had crossed every line, eliminated every obstacle. But in the end, she felt more alone than ever. She turned and walked toward the exit, the sound of her footsteps the only thing that followed her. There was no celebration, no applause, just silence. She had proven herself. She had taken down a rival. But as she stepped out into the night, the world felt different. The city was still the same, but Clara knew that she wasn't the same anymore. She had become someone she never thought she would be. And as the cold air hit her face, she realized that the price of power was a lot higher than she had ever imagined. In this gripping narrative, Clara embarks on a journey that takes her deeper into a world of power, betrayal, and difficult decisions, much like the twists and turns in the best romance stories. From the moment she steps into the shadows of Don Vito's world, she must confront the consequences of her actions as her loyalty is tested. As the story unfolds, Clara finds herself at a crossroads, where every choice she makes could either solidify her place or tear everything apart. The suspense builds, drawing parallels with the emotional intensity often found in romance stories, as Clara faces betrayal, loyalty, and power struggles. The heart of this story reveals how Clara navigates the delicate balance of relationships in a high-stakes world, reflecting the themes explored in many romance stories. Throughout her journey, Clara's actions and decisions become more than just a matter of survival. They are a testament to the power dynamics that drive some of the most unforgettable romance stories. In the end, Clara must decide whether to embrace the darkness of her new life or walk away from everything she has become, encapsulating the ultimate question posed in countless romance stories. Can love and loyalty truly survive in a world defined by power and betrayal?